Hey everyone, so this is your video to go with the modules and the PowerPoints for this week. So I'm not going to spend too much time on sensation. I think it's pretty straightforward. I gave some examples about what sensation is. A few concepts to note. The absolute threshold, this is where something becomes noticeable. So this is really clear, for example, with sound. There's certain sounds the human ear just can't hear. At some point, it becomes loud enough or the tone becomes at the right level where we can actually hear it. That's the absolute threshold. That's when we can suddenly detect it. This varies for everyone, but there are some general human levels of absolute threshold. The difference threshold, this is what it takes for us to notice that a change has occurred. So for example, on a television, if you put the sound up one click, you may not notice the difference. How many clicks does it take for you to actually hear? If you weren't watching someone do it, how many clicks would it take for you to actually notice that the sound had changed? There's a certain percentage that we say that something must change by in order for us to note it. So those are just some kind of theories. Signal detection theory, a lot of times, and again, go back a couple of weeks in your books, there's a lot of sensations, a lot of things that are constantly coming at us that we can perceive. We don't perceive them all. We've talked about this. Certain things we block out, and other things we pay attention to. So some things become background noise, and other things we pay attention to. So we do this. This is signal detection. We do it based on what's important to us. So for example, you'll have stories of parents that can sleep through a thunderstorm, but a small cry of their child wakes them up. So same sort of thing, they're able to block out things that are not important to them and pay attention to things that are. And that's nothing to do with how loud the cry is, it's just what they're able to pay attention to. Other factors that help us determine what we pay attention to are your experience, your expectation, how tired you are, those sorts of things. The other thing, sensory adaptation. So if we continue to hear something, we don't become as sensitive to it. If we continue to feel something, we don't become as sensitive to it over time. So you get used to it. So for example, loud music at a concert, when you first get there, it's very loud. And after a while, you kind of get used to it and it's no longer as loud. It, of course, is still as loud, but you've adapted to it. Subliminal sensation. This is when a sensation is below our level to actually be aware of it. So you detect it less than 50% of the time. So you'll often hear about subliminal messaging, those sorts of things. It's not the same as persuasion, like we're trying to get you to do something. It just means that we may or may not be able to detect it. So the rest of sensation is kind of how our senses actually work. So there's a lot on light. I'm not going to go through this, but definitely do go through it. There will be information on it. Wavelength, intensity, how the color spectrum works, those sorts of questions. The basics of how the eye works, you need to understand. And then we'll go on to, I think, what's next in your PowerPoint? Oh, I should also mention your perception with visual perception. Shape detection, visual information processing, these things, doesn't have to do with exactly how the eye works, but how we sense color, how we sense motion, how we sense form, and how we sense depth. Color blindness is another part of that. Hearing, same sorts of things, understand how hearing works, intensity, frequency, pitch, those sorts of things. Touch, take a look at that. Taste, your sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is fresh chicken. I've never really understood that, but that's what it is. A fifth taste that has been, so to speak, discovered. Important to know sensory interactions. You've already experienced this. A lot of people will say that when you taste something, the smell of it is what really makes the difference as well. So smell and taste are connected to produce the flavor that you actually taste. Take a look at smell. Another one that's not as commonly known is body position and movement, kinesthesis. This is one of those newer senses. So whirling dervishes, basically how you understand your movement of your body. Other senses: temperature, balance, time, digestion, that gut feeling that you sense that someone's there even if you don't see them, those sorts of things. They're kind of up for grabs. Some folks are going to argue that they are senses, other folks are going to say no, they're not. So just take a look at those. Pain is something super fascinating. Watch the videos on this. Pain is something that you can feel, you take in a sensation, but it's not directly linked to sensory input. So for example, if I put my hand on a hot stove, as the common example, the nerves in my fingers feel the pain, send a message up to my brain, I feel pain, right? The thing with pain, though, is that there isn't always that initial sensation. So when I touch the stove, okay, there's a sensation. Phantom limb pain is an example where there is no sensation. There's no limb to feel the tingling or the itch or whatever it is, but yet our brain still senses pain. So watch the videos on that. It's really fascinating. We don't have a good understanding of pain control. We have a lot of folks addicted to pain medicine, and we don't really have any good ways to understand pain, particularly back pain and chronic pain. So look at the gate control theory. That's one way we think it may work. Pain is also much more complicated than just simply what your neurons sense. Your expectations about pain, your mood, and your personality also dictate how much pain you feel. So take a look at that. Then we move on to perception, which I think is just super fascinating. The whole idea is that, as I said, there's so much that we perceive in the world. That we sense in the world, but actually how we make sense of that is how we perceive it. How do we organize that, and what does it mean to us? So we see a picture. You and I may see the same picture, but what we actually perceive, what that picture means to us, may be completely different. And that's based on our experiences, our expectations, all kinds of things like that. So it's not a one-for-one. It's not that a sensation comes into your body and you immediately perceive an objective understanding of what it is. We construct our perceptions based on our assumptions, our expectations, our schemas, what we're expecting to see, our perceptual sets, those sorts of things. So you'll see in the PowerPoint, if you look at the next slide, most people sing the song and therefore don't realize that there's something extra in there. You don't pick it up. Why is that? Because you're not expecting to see something else in that song. You've immediately set to something that you know, and you see that, whether that's actually what's there or not. The next picture is of a guy building a house, and if you will notice in the next picture, the house that he's building is not possible. But you see a dog house because that's what you expect to see. So these are these little, we call them illusions, these little tricks of the brain, where our mind perceives something and puts it together in a certain way to make sense of it, whether that's what's actually there or not. So Gestalt grouping, we'd like to see an organized whole. If there's not an organized whole, we will integrate it into an organized whole. So take a look at some of those. We group based on proximity. We put figures near each other. If they're similar, we put them near each other to make something continuous and to make something close. So here's your examples next in the PowerPoint. Laws of proximity, most of us will see that as 6 dots up and down and 6 dots sideways. That's because they're near each other, so we group them that way. Laws of similarity, most of us will see squares in a row, circles in a row, squares in a row, circles in a row. And we could see it any way we wanted, but we group them that way because they're similar. We see similar objects together. Law of continuity, you see like kind of the whoop and whoop because we want to see it in a continuous thing. We could just see a paper with random dots, but we make that continuous line because that's what our brain with Gestalt grouping is trying to do. Law of closure, objects are grouped together, seen as a whole. So with this, most of us will see a triangle that's not there, but you close it in and you see that triangle. So we ignore the gaps, we ignore the incomplete lines, and we build the whole thing out. Take a look at the TED Talk video. It's a little long, but it's a really great explanation for how this all works. This happens with sound, it happens with visual, and it happens in general. Anything that you sense, that we take in, you're going to perceive it in different ways. And those ways are all based on what you expect to see, the Gestalt laws, those sorts of things. So illusions are neat in that they help us see exactly how this process is going on. So Take a look at the illusions. The Mueller-Lyer illusion is a famous one in psychology. The idea is which is the longer line. If you take a look at it, a lot of people see the bottom as the longer line. In actuality, those lines are the same. The arrows give us the illusion that one is longer than the other. And the next one, take a look at these optical illusions and see what you can see. Each of the pictures has at least 2 images in it, sometimes more. You will see one. Whether or not you see the other can be very difficult. So if you can't see it, see if a friend can see it for you and kind of help you. And once you see it the other way, you can't. It's almost like you can't not see it that way. But the initial instinct is to see it one way or the other. And this is just your explanation of perception, how we perceive things. An example that I like to use is, there's actually a meme about this. When I say stop, in my mind, there's like 3 different songs that the lyrics may go to. So Stop in the Name of Love or Stop Hammer Time. There's always one other one I forget. Those are the 2 ones that stick out to me. Stop, collaborate, and listen. So I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. So the idea is that I say stop, and my brain automatically fills it in with something that I already know, right? Like what immediately comes to mind. For you, a totally different song may come to mind. But the idea is that we perceive these things differently. And it's all based on our own understanding, our own experience, what we expect to see. When you see Mary Had a Little Lamb, you expect Mary Had a Little Lamb. You don't realize that that extra A is in there because it's not what you expected to see. Those are all based on our perceptual sets, on our schemas. When something messes with it, we often don't see it. If it doesn't go along with the schema or the perception that we're supposed to. So these are a lot of interesting examples, but as you hopefully are realizing, there are a lot of real-world implications for this. So the discussion section post is going to be a picture, and I'd like you to post what you see in that picture before you look at everyone else's responses. And people see very different things in pictures like this because it resonates with their own experiences very differently. So it's the same picture. The sensations, how your eyes are working for most of you, unless you're colorblind, is the exact same way. But you may see something totally different based on perception and how that works. So pretty powerful stuff to know when you're looking at advertising, when you're looking at how to get people to learn, all sorts of things. Having a firm grasp that just because you put something out doesn't mean that everyone is going to perceive it in the same way. Does it mean that one is right or wrong? Not necessarily. Like if you look at that Mary Had a Little Lamb, there is an extra A in there. That's just the way it is. If you look at the picture, can I say that my interpretation, my perception of it is wrong and yours is right? Not really. So this is where we get a lot of the subjectivity in the world. How do we know which one of us is perceiving it right? The other example is, for example, if I say tree and I ask you to draw a tree, or visualize a tree in your mind, what type of tree would you draw, right? So most of us draw like a little, kind of like a stick tree. I can't draw it on this, but a little stick tree with like leaves around the top. Some of you may draw a pine tree, some of you may draw a Christmas tree, some of you may draw a palm tree. If you were raised in Florida, when I say tree, you may instantly go to palm tree. If it's Christmas time, you may instantly go to Christmas tree, right? So all of those things can affect the perception of when I say the word tree, what actually comes to mind when it's the same word. So anyway, lots of examples for this. Take a look at your all of the resources in your textbook and the PowerPoint to get a firm handle of this, because it's some pretty interesting stuff. And as always, if anything's confusing, not clear, you have questions, let me know so I can help you work through it. Thanks.